Speaker. Kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, I'm glad to speak. It's a privilege to speak to this bill, which is essentially a rearguard action by the people of Rodney who have been steamrolled into something they didn't want a bar of, and for very good reason. I have some affinity for the area, having lived at Whangaparoa for some 13, 14 years, and recently held a public meeting in Whangaparoa. It was an entirely other topic. It was attended both by Green Party members and supporters, but also predominantly by members of the public, perhaps not politically affiliated, and one only needed to scratch an inch below the surface to find a great deal of anger and frustration at the fact that Rodney has been pushed into this unwanted and in many ways unnecessary amalgamation. Our colleague Tau Henare earlier was reflecting on what I think is an extremely optimistic view, that the government will not take a political hit on this issue. In fact, I will indeed disabuse the member of that belief. There will be a political cost for this. There is a great deal of anger and frustration at the loss of democracy, as there has been throughout the very ungainly and unsatisfactory process of melding Auckland into one mass. The local bill is a frustration of that hostility, that attack on democracy that has occurred in Auckland as elsewhere, and particularly in Canterbury. Throughout the region, people feel disenfranchised. They have spoken, but they have not been listened to. Mr Twyford and I and other Labour MPs, and indeed other Green MPs, ran a series of meetings. We went around the entire region hearing people's stories, including the stories of people from Rodney. And they presented very compelling arguments why at least North Rodney, and if not in fact the entire district, ought to be left out of the amalgamation. Some 6,000, in fact over 6,000 people signed a petition. They went to the trouble of presenting that petition on the Houses of Parliament. They also asked for people of a contrary view who supported the amalgamation, and managed to find only a few hundred in North Rodney who supported that view. It's true that there are a number of people who think the join-in super city is a good idea, many of them under what is clearly a false belief that they will get a bigger slice of a larger pie. There is in some quarters an understanding and expectation that Rodney going into Auckland Super City will mean more money spent in Rodney, on roading, on infrastructure, on transport, on other public amenities. Clearly we know that whoever comes into the council in a few months' time will take a great deal of money and expenditure of other resources simply to establish the super city, simply to get some workable form to the very poorly designed and what is increasingly a poorly implemented process of creating the super city. That will be a very long time before the council has the time or the wherewithal to consider basically the outlying parts of the city, Manukau, Franklin and indeed Rodney district. There is a reason why the proponents of Super City were so determined to have Rodney in the Super City, particularly North Rodney, which is primarily a rural environment, far from the Queen Street, far from the West, South, North Shore, which are primarily urban developments, clearly. One word, and that word is land bank. Some would have it that Auckland, the Greater Auckland, should aspire to a population of some 2 million, so 700,000 people more than we currently have. Clearly those people will be wanting to live and work and enjoy recreation somewhere, and it is very clear that Rodney is being preserved as a land bank for future development, despite the wishes and aspirations of people who currently live there, particularly since there is a strong push to remove the metropolitan urban limits in the false belief that the spatial plan will render such a mechanism unnecessary. This is bad. This is a good position, a good statement of the feelings, the very deeply held feelings of the Rodney people, and the Greens will be very happy to support it on that basis. Kia ora.
David Garrett.